Hi, in this video we're going to look at part 2 of the IELTS speaking test. We'll be looking at the planning stage again, as if we're planning in the real test, and we'll be looking at something that is probably quite achievable to do within that 1 minute preparation time that you get in the test to prepare your speaking for part 2. We'll be looking at this specific task card, so to describe your favourite film. And if you remember from last week's video, this task card actually connects to what we were talking about in that video. We were thinking about how to prepare for these types of tasks. The types of tasks that ask you to describe your favorites or things that you like or enjoy. In the previous video, we were talking about building up your ideas and vocabulary so you're ready to come up with an idea quickly when you're in the test and you get given a task card like this. Now, it's not guaranteed that you'll get a task card like this. You could get a task card that kind of falls into another category that we've talked about previously, but it's definitely worth preparing for this one and thinking about building ideas, building vocabulary that you can use when you're in the real test. And of course, in the previous video, we were thinking about when you have a lot of time to prepare before you go into the test. In this video, we'll be thinking about how you can plan appropriately for when you're actually in the test and you've got to make very short, brief notes. So I'm going to show you what my idea would be for this task card. And we'll go through each of those 4 cues one by one, and I'll be showing you exactly what I would write down on the piece of paper that I would get in the test to make my notes with. And it's something that, of course, in this video is going to take more than 1 minute to explain, but it's something that is achievable within that 1 minute when you're in the test, as long as you've done lots of preparation before you go to the test on these types of areas, or well, if you prepared an idea for your favorite film. And I think that really is the key, that you're kind of preparing as much as you can on as many different topics as you can before you go into the test. Now here, I'm not saying you have to try to memorize some kind of script. That's not the idea. But you've really got to consider what are these things that you could talk about when you're in the test, so you don't waste time when the examiner gives you that topic card and asks you to prepare for 1 minute, to talk for 2 minutes about this topic, whatever's on the card. You don't want to be wasting time kind of thinking about what to talk about. You want to make that choice very, very quickly in a split second. You've got to decide, and the only way you can do that really is by doing a lot of preparation beforehand and having those ideas ready to go straight away. So then you can focus on writing down some notes to follow when you're speaking and the examiner is listening to you. So let's have a look at this topic card. Now, of course, it is about a favorite. Now, and here it says your favorite film. So of course, straight away, I've got to decide what the film is I'm talking about. And for me, that film is a film called Gattaca. Now, you probably haven't heard of this film. It is quite old. But again, we'll go into some detail on it, and I would advise anyone who hasn't seen it before to give it a watch, because it is quite a good film, and it's still good, even compared to the kind of films we have nowadays. Anyway, then we've got those 4 cues underneath that first kind of line at the top that asks you to describe something. And then we've got the first cue, which is when and where you saw it. Now, of course, really, this is quite useful because it's really 2 cues rather than 1. We've got when, which of course is the time you saw it, and where, well, the place that you saw it. So 2 things there. Now, we've got to come up with at least 1 idea for each of those things there, when and where. So, well, of course, for me, when it was, this was a long time ago. I was a teenager when I watched this film. So the key word I'd write down to remind myself to say that would be teens. That would be the word I would think of writing down so I can kind of think of that and then go into more detail when I'm speaking. Where I saw it, I was actually at a friend's house, or the house of my friend. So I would write down just those 2 key words there, friend's house. So I can look at that sheet and look at my piece of paper and go into more detail about where I saw it. Of course, those 2 words are not enough to kind of go into lots of detail, but I can't do that when I'm making notes. It's going to have to be short keywords, give me the ideas so I can expand on them and go into more detail when I'm speaking. There's no way you can be writing down whole sentences in the planning stage. So once I've got that, that's enough there for that first cue, and I'll move on to the second cue, which is what type of film it was. Of course, then I've got to be able to describe this type of film. Really here, I only need 1 or 2 keywords to remind me what to say, and this film is a sci-fi film. It's based in the future, or it's set in the future. It's also a bit of a thriller because it's quite exciting and tense. So I would write those 2 words down on my notes, sci-fi and thriller, just so I can look down, be reminded of that, and then speak about it in more detail. Then I'd move on to the next cue. Of course, the next cue is what the film was about. So this gives you a lot of opportunity to go into lots of detail about the story. Basically, you're summarizing the story of the film. Now, here, I can only have time to write down a couple of key words. Now, this film is kind of all about a man and his dream. And his dream is to go into outer space, to travel in space. So really here, what I would write down is just man's dream. Okay, just so I've got those 2 keywords there to remind me what to say. It's also really on the theme of genetics and DNA. One thing about this film is that he's kind of born with genetics that doesn't allow him to go and do this and fulfill his dream. And that is really a big theme of the film, about kind of genetics and DNA. So maybe I would write down DNA, just to remind myself to talk about that kind of theme within the film. So we got a few key words there to remind me of what to say. Then the final cue, and we really want to get to this final cue in our planning and when we're speaking, because you can see here it's connected with feelings. Explain why it is your favorite film. So here, again, a couple of words to remind me what to say. I think here, because it's about feelings and why it's your favorite film, then we're going to write down some adjectives here to remind us to use those adjectives and go into more detail on them. So the 2 words I'd use to describe this film is maybe intelligent and provocative. 2 nice adjectives there that I can go into more detail on. It's intelligent, it's a film that makes you think about stuff, and it's provocative. Again, something that really kind of makes you think about something maybe you haven't thought about before, but it's a intelligent and provocative film. So we'd write down those 2 key words to remind us to go into more detail again. So there we go. We've got those kind of ideas for each of those cues now. And it's definitely realistic. You can see there, it's not too many words. So you would probably be able to write down that much within the 1 minute that the examiner gives you to prepare. Now, of course, I also want to try and include some of those phrases and vocabulary and things that I was doing and finding out in my preparation time before the test. And that's something I was doing with this film in the past week, was looking on the internet and seeing if I could find any nice words or phrases connected to this film and also connected to people's favorite films in general. So what I would do in the real test, if I had time after I've written down these key ideas for each point, is maybe then add some vocabulary that I want to use in my response. And I'm going to do that now for each of these ideas that relate to the 4 cues. Now, you might not have time to do this in the test, and it might not be something you'll be able to do, but it's possible you will have that time, especially if you practice this process before you go into the test, or practice it quite a lot so you can kind of do this very quickly and write down your key ideas. You might have time to write down some extra vocabulary. So for the first point, which was of course when and where you saw it, and we wrote down those key ideas of teens and friends' house. I think there, what I could do is write down the phrasal verb come out. This is a phrasal verb that relates to films. Now, films are released in the cinema. We can also use the phrase come out, but of course we use it in a slightly different way. We're not using the passive voice there, we're using the active voice. We're saying films come out rather than films are released. They come out in the cinema. This will be useful to use when I'm speaking about when and where I saw it, because it's related to the time when people can first see this film, when it came out in the past. So I'll just write down that phrasal verb to remind me to use it when I'm speaking in the kind of 2-minute time limit that the examiner gives me. Then I might think about the next point, which was the type of film it was. Now, we wrote down those key ideas: sci-fi, thriller. Now, I could write down some more descriptive words about what type of film it was. Maybe, as I mentioned before, the film was or is extremely tense, right? It's one of those films that makes you feel, quite nervous about what's going to happen. It's really, really exciting. So those two keywords, they're extremely tense. And also a word or a phrase that you'll see quite often when you see this particular film being described is that it's a cult classic. And I would write those two words down there. Now, a cult classic, it basically means a film that's not a blockbuster. It's not really popular with everyone, but it's popular with a small group of people who have got really, really interested in that film, and it's become kind of really popular within that group of people. It's a cult classic, which is true for this film. So I've got those words there to remind myself to use them when I look down at that piece of paper when I'm speaking. In the test, I can remember to say those words. Then we'll move to the third point, which was about, what the film was about. And of course, I said before, we've got these keywords, man's dream and DNA. We've got those details there, or the main ideas that we can go into more detail on. And I think really kind of thinking of other phrases we can use to describe the story, explain the story. One phrase that I found quite often when we were doing our preparation, following the advice from the previous video, the film is about overcoming inequality. So kind of being able to succeed in something even though everything's against you, right? This inequality, the fact that the society in this film or in this story is very, very unequal. Okay, especially for the man in the film. He's born with not many opportunities, but he's able to overcome that. He's able to solve that problem. This is a nice collocation between a verb and a noun here, to overcome inequality. And I want to remind myself to use that when I'm speaking about kind of the film and what happens in the film. So it's about this guy who overcomes inequality. So those two keywords is what I would write down on my notes. Then finally, we move on to that fourth and final cue, which is explain why it's your favorite film. Now, I said I used a few adjectives to describe the film and why I really liked it. It's intelligent and provocative. We had those two words before. We can think of a few extra things, a few maybe even extra adjectives I want to use here, some extra phrases. So maybe the adjective thought-provoking. Right? It's connected to being provocative, right? It makes you think about these issues and what society could be like in the future, or even things that are very similar now to what the movie is talking about. And thought-provoking is a nice kind of less common adjective for people, non-native speakers, to use. I would write down that adjective there. And also maybe the phrase to pose questions. Now, that might be a verb that people are not so aware of, but to kind of give questions, to give you questions, to make you think about something that maybe you haven't thought about before. And this film definitely makes you do that. So it poses questions. So again, I might write down those two words next to this point. Also, maybe the word determination as well. This is connected to kind of why it's an entertaining film. This man who has a dream has a lot of determination. He's determined to reach his goal, to be able to go to space. And everything's against him, but he's still able to do it. So he has a lot of determination. A keyword, a nice noun that I can use when I'm speaking for that 2 minutes that the examiner gives. So there we go. I mean, that's, I think, just about achievable within that 1 minute planning time. Definitely the ideas that we can get down first, and that is the most important thing. When you're in the test, you need to have enough ideas to keep you speaking for that full 2 minutes. Usually when I have students who can't fill the 2 minutes, it's not to do with how much vocabulary they have or how much grammar they know. It's about running out of ideas. If you run out of ideas, you just stop speaking. So you need to make sure you got enough ideas, and that's the first thing you need to do. Have at least one idea for each of those cues on the task card. And then, if you have time, write down some words, some vocabulary that you can use when you're talking about those key ideas. And that is pretty much achievable within that 1 minute if you practice a lot and if you prepare a lot. So these ideas come to you very quickly rather than wasting time really coming up with the ideas. If you come up with these ideas before you go into the test, then you'll be able to write them down quicker when you're in the test. So this is the thing. There's a lot of preparation you can do, particularly for part 2 of the IELTS speaking test. Now, ideally, you'll improve your general speaking skills so you can get a higher score in the test, but there is a lot of targeted practice you can do on these specific topic areas or categories of tasks in part 2. So I advise you to do that. If you haven't already, look into your favorite film online or your favorite website, your favorite book, and start preparing a lot of these ideas and then practicing using this 1 minute preparation time and see how quickly you can write down a few key ideas for each cue, and maybe also adding some vocabulary and phrases that you want to use when you're going into detail on those ideas. Now, in the next video, we will be looking at a full answer that follows this planning. And hopefully that will help you to see how we can kind of go into detail on each of these ideas and use the vocabulary that we've written down in the planning stage. And that will give you a nice example that hopefully you can use as a bit of inspiration to talk about your own film. Really, why we're doing this is to kind of show you a really nice high-level example, but also inspire you to start researching your own answers and improving your speaking yourself as well. These are not templates that you can just memorize and use in the test. That's not really going to work. The examiner will see straight through something like that, and it's unlikely that you'll be able to do that because the topic card you get in the test probably won't fit exactly to what these topic cards that we're preparing. But hopefully it's giving you some ideas, helping you to build your vocabulary a little bit, and encouraging you to practice and prepare more for these types of tasks in IELTS speaking. So there we go. Hopefully you have found this useful. And if you have, then remember to click the like button. And if you haven't already, remember to subscribe to the channel so you see similar videos in the future and you don't miss out on anything. Also, if you feel like you want to see other videos that will be covering other topics and giving advice, then do make suggestions in the comments, right? I'm always open to new things. I know a lot of these videos are focusing on sample answers that I think should be quite useful, but there might be other things that you're wondering about the test that you want me to cover and give advice on, and I'm happy to do that. So don't forget to leave comments if there are things that you would find useful or things that you're wondering about connected with the IELTS test. Thanks for watching, and see you again in the next video.